you so much, Gil. And I want to just give my where was I in fall of 2002, because I was living in Echo Park and was going out to pick up the morning edition of La Opinión, which was used to be home delivered at the time, and opening it up, and there's a picture of probably one of the saddest people I've ever seen, just sitting there kind of heartbroken, and the title, the actual title in La Opinión was "The Weight of the World on His Shoulders," and it was Gil Cedillo in the aftermath of seeing this legislation shot down. And there was something about that, and what was captured in Spanish, the Spanish language paper, about the significance of that moment and what it means for a person as an individual to stand up and to try to change something, but also to have to bear the brunt of how difficult it is to change something. And I have to say, it was a pleasure and an honor to hear you narrate this 15-year process. But I just wanted to share back with you that that is one of the most indelible images and moments in my life, is seeing that and realizing La Opinión got it right. They understood exactly what was happening in that moment. And so I want to thank you, and in a way you have done the job of Rachel and myself and Tom of summing up. You've actually summed up our conference. We do have a reception, and I'll ask everybody's indulgence for an extra 10 minutes, so each of us can maybe say 2 or 3 minutes in terms of where we think we came today in terms of this conference. I'm not going to sum things up in the usual sense, but I will give you the arc of what I felt happened. One, why education? I think Tom and Rachel, they've hit it on the head. Where do our elected officials come from? They come from people who have gotten law degrees. Where do university presidents come from? Professors, where do they come from? They got PhDs. You look at museum directors, they come from curators. Where do curators come from? They got PhDs. You look at principals, where do they come from? Teachers. They got graduate degrees in education. At every point, we have become increasingly a society in which access to leadership positions is determined by post-BA degrees. And this was not always the case, but it is almost entirely the case. You look at even people directing films in Hollywood. They didn't used to go to film school, there didn't used to be film schools. but thanks to UCLA, now they all have to come from a film school. They have to have that MFA degree. So this is increasingly important in terms of decision making and image making. What did we hear today? We have seen cases, heard about cases of Latinos as a target of legal decisions, of legislation, and of policies. We've heard about the courts as a place for trying to regain education or gain educational equity, but that it's not the only place and it's not really the most efficient place. But I think what we've heard from scholars, from lawyers, from student activists and advocates, educational advocates, is that the legal method actually is very helpful. And the legal method, I think, and I would sum it down to, I think Gil's life is a good example of the legal method applied in many different arenas. And that is to pull together the evidence that documents disparities and outcome. To then take that evidence and take it to a platform. I think Gil had exactly the right word. I'd written it down earlier in the day and I realized, yeah, he validated me. I'm footnoting Gil Cedillo right now. You take it to a platform where you can present that evidence. Now here's the hard part. And I think Gil, his life story just demonstrates that, whether it's in labor organizing or legislation. You have to know the language of that platform. You have to know the culture and professional rules of that platform. And you have to have, as they would say, the cojones to speak the evidence, to present the other supporters that they're going to. They're not going to the government and saying, we have X number of people that are supporting us. At whatever level, they have shown that this is important to support. So I want to emphasize that. I'm sorry, Rachel. I'll make a plea for the law school at our next event, but I think this is so critical, and it's really, it was part of the rough birth of MALDEF, having been somebody who actually went through the archival records of that. It was a decision made to rely initially on government and foundations at the expense of a broad-based support, but I think the organization in the last 2 decades, it's critical. And it's been an important part of it, that this is an organization that serves the community but also draws its support from the community. So I want to emphasize that. And I guess I'll end and ask Rachel to come up and just say what an incredible moment we're in here, a presidential election in which the fathers of both candidates were born in other countries. One in Mexico, one in Kenya. And guess which one is being talked about, which one's problematic. This follows an election 4 years ago in which the candidates were said to have been born in other countries, one in Panama and the other in Kenya. One was true, one was not. Guess which one people had trouble with. Now, in case you think that this is about Latin America having some kind of special, as we've heard recently, advantage, that being Panamanian or Mexican really counts, that's not what's happening. So, and I think it's important that we bring these inconsistencies, these disparities forward in talking about the DREAM Act students, because we're not playing with the same set of rules here, we're shifting. So with that, I want to invite Rachel and then Tom as our final.
Well, I want to first say thank you to everyone who participated. I think this has been a remarkably stimulating conversation and ended on such a high note with your description of your successful pursuit of legislation that you thought was important to a healthy society. I want to say that I have found very interesting today several themes that I'm going to identify that I think ran throughout the day. And the first is that people would often say, gee, the Latino population is growing by leaps and bounds, and we see restrictive legislation, but we see it in states like Alabama, which may have very few undocumented students. Why in states with relatively few people who might fit the category is there such an anxiety? And in an earlier era, prohibition was adopted, and that was a status conflict over immigrants who were Catholic. And in the early 1900s, there was also English-only legislation that was passed, and the case in which the challenge arose was the state of Oregon, which had almost no non-English speaking immigrants in its population. So status anxiety isn't just about numbers. It's about the perception of numbers, it's about the perception of threat. And I think that today we heard a lot of discussions about what it means to say, we the people of the United States of America. And I think we're seeing several lines of status anxiety. In the civil rights movement, we thought we understood what the challenges based on race were. But the rise of the Latino population has actually created new complexities in our understanding of civil rights. We the people. And I think it is both anxiety-inducing for whites who felt, I thought we solved those problems, but also for African Americans who have to figure out what their place is going to be in a multiracial paradigm and wonder whether it will perhaps further minimize their chances for access and opportunity if that paradigm is weakened. But I think there's another axis of anxiety, and it is about the United States of America and our place in an increasingly globalized world. The truth is that the discussion today has not been only about race. Immigration has figured very prominently. And immigrants are the living embodiment of our fears about globalization. And so Latinos really upset a couple of axes of things we thought we understood. We thought we understood who we were racially with the civil rights movement, and we thought we understood who we were as the leader of the free world with an unquestioned economic dominance. And both of those things are being questioned. And Latinos become the site on which those contestations take place. Now, part of what happens because we have these different axes is that it is a more complex conversation. And so we heard today about race, ethnicity, poverty, immigration, language, culture. And all of those are dimensions that make it that much more possible to say, you don't belong. You're too poor. You don't speak English. You're from another country. You have a certain kind of complexion. I'm not sure you're really loyal. That was the part about the subversive races in Boyle Heights. And I think it's ironic that at the same time that these can be more hurdles to the terms of belonging, they also provide us potentially, if we think about it, with more opportunities to challenge inequality. Because we also see a proliferation of legal protections around language. We see a press for legal protection around immigration, around culture, and we want to help students with low socioeconomic status to have real access to opportunity. So even as the categories multiply and they can seem like hurdles, they can also be portals into opportunity if we as lawyers and policymakers do our work. Now, I thought a third really interesting part of the conversation related to federalism, because what we have seen is that the federal government, in part because paralyzed by partisanship, has not been able to speak definitively to what our values are as a nation. Congress is paralyzed. I think the president was weakened by partisan conflict, and the court is dominated by people who often feel that it is a formal law rather than a living law that needs to be enunciated. And that has left us with a state of normative pluralism. We are all over the map. We have states like California with leaders who are pushing for one version of equality and liberty, and legislators in the state next door are pushing for a very different one. And no one can quite figure out how we're going to resolve those complex value disputes that reflect the growing complexity of our population. Shall we wait for the federal branch, the federal government, to make some definitive conclusions? We'll wait perhaps a very long time, even longer than 15 years. But how do we at the state level then create a sense of momentum towards a normative set of judgments that we believe reflect our values and our beliefs about a healthy society? Now, I do want to say that today we heard a lot about law as sometimes as an abstract given, but it's not. It's what we build. It reflects the society that we are. It reflects our deepest aspirations, our greatest hopes. It is a vessel into which we pour ourselves. And without our commitment, day after day, year after year, law can become an effete and hollow thing. Ironically, before Brown versus Board of Education was decided, the common wisdom was that hearts could not change, laws could not change the hearts and minds of humankind. But look where we are today. We've heard a lot about the challenges, but could you even imagine having an African American sitting in the Oval Office before Brown versus Board of Education? Law is a powerful tool. I ask you to use it wisely, to use it hopefully, and I am both optimistic and hopeful. And I don't think my faith is blind, because sitting before me are people like you who I know are going to work with everything that is in you to make sure that we achieve the just society that our laws must and should reflect. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you all for staying here. Thank you all for, I think you really had a treat in listening to both Professor Noriega and Dean Moran in summarizing some of what has been discussed today. And I just want to add a little more of a wrinkle to that. And I also, of course, want to thank Chon for the donation. And I'm going to get that fixed on the website. So with one click of a button, make the donation that you want. I spoke this morning, had the chance to speak this morning about how important the task before us was, that the Latino educational pipeline is a national lifeline for our entire country and its future. And that, I think, accurately described what we were going to explore throughout the day. But let me end today by explaining why I think what happened today is so important and why it must continue to occur throughout the year and throughout the years and decades as we move forward. And that is this. This cross-disciplinary discussion is critical to doing exactly what